What do you think about the Laker team now?
You follow the box scores of the games every day? Just the Lakers.
You're kidding. That is really a compliment. I was pleased to see you smile at the top of our show because once the game starts, you have a game face. You don't smile much out there.
I don't think you have to do things for money anymore.
Correct.
What's up, Laker fans? Welcome to the Laker Film Room podcast. I'm Pete, joined as always by Darius, and today we have our first third-time guest. We're joined by he of the Taking Charge podcast and great stats all over Twitter, Mr. Crantis McBasketball. Tim, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, just wiping off the blood from fighting eye test Twitter. But I'm here to have some fun. Let's go.
Yeah, that was fun today, man. I enjoyed, like we were saying off air, I enjoyed defending your honor. So only I get to pick on you and roast you in such ways. I think Reed is allowed to make fun of your pastel stylings in terms of your clothing, but I think that's about it.
I didn't even know Tim existed until when I followed him on Twitter yesterday. So nice to meet you, Tim.
Yeah. What the hell, Darius? I've been putting out every once in a while. I'll put out like a poll, like how long will it take Darius to follow me? And everybody would say like he'll never follow you. Was always the answer everyone would pick.
In theory, I never saw those. So
because you don't follow him.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly his point. Tim actually he pined for this at Summer League. He kind of wistfully hoped that someday Darius Soriano would follow him on Twitter, and here we are.
Welcome to the 700 Club. Yes, I was going to ask if like eye test Twitter was like some sort of optometrist group or something, because I didn't realize there was like
They accidentally get looped in every once in a while, and It's confusing for them,
Okay.
and we apologize. But
Darius, you have the most followers of anyone I know that like misses so much of the culture of basketball Twitter, and it's like usually the worst parts. I'm actually jealous of how you're able to like. What's eye test Twitter? Anyway.
I mean, I know that there's people who are adamant about the eye test and whatnot. It's just look, man. Get over it already.
It's because there's a segment out there that uses really, really bad stats, and their account is solely dedicated to like posting who has the best PER, or who has the best VORP today, or whatever the hell it is.
Interesting.
And I think that sets people off, and there's a lot of like bad analytics Twitter.
Do you run those accounts, Tim?
I do not, but I get in arguments with them. I've had people be like, "Oh man, Kyrie's the truth," and I'll be like, "Oh well, what about this?" And they'll say, "Oh, well, I run analytics." I'm like, "Yeah, buddy, I do too. Show me some real data."
Wow, we're off to a roaring start here. Almost 3 minutes.
We are.
I'm definitely deleting all of this now.
No.
We'll keep some.
No, leave it in.
Because this won't be long enough as it is. All right, I apologize to everyone. What we're doing today is we're doing the season preview podcast for the Lakers. We're going to go through most of the main guys, probably talk a little bit about Luke as well. Let's start off with the newest and biggest and brightest star, Lonzo Ball, starting off his rookie year. We're recording this on Tuesday night. He's less than 48 hours away from tip-off in the first real game for him of his NBA career. Darius, recently you wrote a piece yesterday for Forum Blue and Gold on he's gonna play, but what are your hopes and expectations for Lonzo in his rookie year?
You and I, Pete, I think we're both incredibly high on Ball as a prospect. In theory, I think that he could be the best player in the draft. It's just that what we've seen of Ball through his NBA career to this point, so that's Summer League and I mean like a game and a half of preseason basketball, is that he seems to get better when he gets more experience at the level that he's playing at. That was certainly true for Summer League, and it was certainly I thought he looked better in the second game of preseason than he did in the first game. And it seemed to be following that same trend before he sprained his ankle. And so in terms of expectations, I don't necessarily have like numbers for you in terms of like stat projections or things like that. I just think that by the end of the year, I expect him to be playing his best basketball. Just because I think that he's one of those guys who really seems to learn from experiences and really seems to get the hang of what defenses and individual players are trying to do for him. His game is so feel-based that I feel like once he gets more and more comfortable at the pro level, that he's just going to get better and better.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Darius said. Lonzo seemed to be a guy that started off a little slow in summer league and was able to kind of catch his stride, and he didn't really quite have the chance to do that in preseason. We got to see a little bit of it with that second preseason game, but overall just got a really, really small snapshot of what he is able to do. We got to see a couple things that excited me, just some like UCLA style pick and rolls, which it's what they did at UCLA, where he'd have a big set of screen and then slip that, and then Lonzo would be looking to pass to the rolling big guy, or shooters relocating from wings to corners or corners to threes, where corners to the wings. So we got to see that just a little bit. So it was cool to see the coaching staff recognize something he was good at in college and try to emulate some of that with this preseason team. He about like 50% of his possessions in the half court over that game and a half were him running the pick and roll or attacking off of a handoff, which is something he did a lot at UCLA. The difference was at UCLA he was distributing a lot more, whereas with LA that ratio isn't quite there the same way it was. And I think a lot of that has to do with the team not having all their sets fully in and not having a ton of like weak side motion during those situations.
I think you're going to get switching more in the NBA too. I don't think that's as common of a coverage on the college level because the bigs can't really handle it to the degree that they can at the NBA level. Now, in some programs, your Kentuckies, you're going to have Bam Adebayo switching onto Lonzo, but I think that part of the reason that we're seeing Lonzo having to finish a little more often is the defensive coverages are a little bit different on the NBA level, where they're going to be able to scout him and be like, hey, all right, we're going to switch the big onto you. Can you score on that?
Exactly, and that was one of the areas of concern we had with him, just looking at what he was able to do in his sample at UCLA and seeing, okay, what haven't we seen? And that was one of those things. Like, how does he approach a switch? How does he attack that? So we'll still need to see him grow there. I was excited to see him used a little bit off of screens. I saw some floppy action where he was running off of screens there. There was another play where he set a pin down screen and then ran off of staggered screens as some weak side motion. So I think if LA can try to utilize that shooting skill set that he brings to the table, it could be really useful for this team, especially considering how just relatively we don't have as many shooters as a lot of other teams do. And with Lonzo being one of our best guys, I think it'd be great to get him in those opportunities where he can catch and look to score with a step or two on his guy from those screens before he gets the ball.
Absolutely. I do think, though, there's still some question, and this is something I do think he projects well on, but we've seen so little of him, and in the little time that we have seen him, he hasn't shot the ball particularly well from distance. And I speculate that he'll be able to do that effectively, but he hasn't done that yet in a fairly small sample, and I do still think that that's a question mark. And on this particular team, where you have a few questionable shooters, I do think Lonzo needs to be in the 34-ish% range from three-point range in order to keep the overall effectiveness of the offense humming along. If they're able to switch or go under screens on him and he's not able to make them pay, I do think that's going to be something that is really problematic on this particular team with, Ingram not being a great three-point shooter yet. KCP's okay. If Nance is going to be the starter, he's not there. Lopez is really the most consistently effective threat, right along the same level as KCP in that respect. I think you need at least that third guy out there. I'm also, speaking of Lopez, I'm really excited to see him and Lonzo play together. We didn't get to see that in the preseason. And I think that Lopez is really a crucial guy for Lonzo in those type of situations. I don't think you can switch Alonzo Lopez pick and roll, because it's not going to be Lonzo that beats you, it's going to be Lopez, and he's a good enough passer to be able to exploit if the defense collapses down on that post up against the smaller player. So between those things, and then I think Lonzo's going to start out a little bit slow. His conditioning level is. There was a scrimmage yesterday where they were getting up and down, and he looked good while he was in there, but he came over to the sideline to the chair that was there, and he was just like, I just need a minute. And he's like totally out of breath, right? And everybody else was doing all right. When you mix that with your rookie year, you got Patrick Beverley on the first night. I think it's going to be about 2 weeks before he gets his legs underneath him.
One thing I was going to say, just to jump in, when you guys were talking about Lonzo's shooting and how it projects and actions that they can use to sort of optimize his shooting, I think a big key for him this year is what kinds of threes is he actually taking? Is he taking pull-up threes in transition? Is he taking a bunch of threes off of the dribble when guys go under screens? Or is he taking threes off of kickouts where people are sort of creating shots for him, or moving off of screens where he does have a step and he has a chance to set his feet off of the catch? Or is he relocating into spots where guys are giving him the ball? Is he taking threes off of handoffs? I have more concerns about him at this point as a shooter where he's actually handling the ball and then having to sort of create his own space in order to get a jump shot off. I'm just seeing sort of, I don't want to call it sloppy footwork. Pete, you can speak more to this from a technical aspect, but he's just not on balance as much as he needs to be. We talk about this from Ingram a lot, but it happens with Lonzo a fair amount too. You know, when he's really planted and he's able to sort of dip and get into his shooting motion cleanly and he's not worried about his feet at all, I think he's going to be perfectly fine. But when guys are going under screens on him, especially when he's going to his right hand and then he's sort of bringing his motion back to his left, then that's where I start to have a little bit more concerns. And guys are going to go under screens on him a lot just because I think the little amount of tape that we have on him so far is he's pretty effective as a downhill player. You know, he can finish at the rim well enough, and he's such a great passer that once he gets into the lane and the defense collapse at all, or if he's got shooters on the court who are just relocating into space, and I'm not even talking like three-point shooters, I'm talking about even if a guy like Lopez or Nance or Zubac are sort of shifting into that 10 to 15 foot range, he finds them. And so guys are not going to want him to get downhill. And the easiest way to get downhill when you're a guard is fighting over the top of a screen in a pick and roll and letting that guard sort of come at a big man, even if he's not hedging hard. And a lot of teams don't hedge hard now. They just don't. Like, I think that most teams are more comfortable sitting their defensive big man a little bit below the screen and sort of inviting that mid-range jump shot because that's where the data says you're going to be least effective as an offense. But Ball is smart enough to not take that mid-range shot, and he's going to pressure that big man with his dribble. And so I see guards going under picks on him. And if he's going to settle for a 25-foot three-pointer, that's going to be a problem.
In terms of his footwork, I actually think he's, and I'd love to get data on this, but I don't think it's collected in this way. I think he's at his best when he's coming up from a corner position. One of the difficulties that he has, and I've demonstrated this in a video, is he doesn't have brakes right now. He doesn't know how to go from 100 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour or how to change speeds particularly well. So when he's coming off of a screen and going downhill, he has to shoot floaters because he doesn't know how to stop yet. He doesn't know how to jump stop or 1-2 step into a shot comfortably. When the Lakers run their like delay series stuff and he either sets the down screen and then pops back out or he starts out in the corner, he's able to, with his momentum going away from the basket, it's actually better for him as a shooter because he doesn't have to slow himself down in the direction where he's going toward the basket. So when he comes up from the corner, a couple of the summer league threes that he did hit off of the ball were off of that sort of action where he was heading toward the opposite basket coming from the corner up to the wing. And so these are all things that it's going to be a progression, similar to what we see with Ingram, right, in his jump shot. It's something that it's progressive over time. So Lonzo's going to have to learn the footwork and the technique of how to change speeds, of how to stop and how to collect yourself. And that's something he's not going to be particularly good at right away.
Yeah, and like you said, Pete, he does have, like, the footwork he does have, I guess you didn't say this, but where he is comfortable and what he did at UCLA and what he was kind of known for was that step back that he was doing. And the 2 threes that he has made in preseason were both step back threes, had the ball took a dribble, step back, and then took it and made it.
That's with his momentum going away from the basket, too. It's like same idea, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And the ones he was missing were kind of running to the side. It didn't quite have those breaks. His momentum was off. And he airballed one. He had one that was way off, running off of handoff. So he's running and then stop right when he gets around the big and tries to just stop his momentum, turn and shoot. We saw there the footwork wasn't set. His hips weren't really squared the way you'd want them, and just really bad misses that way. It's tough to look at the data just because we don't have much at all from preseason. I could tell you that during Summer League, I was looking at all the misses he did have, and a lot of those were what I'd consider good misses, where he was missing just a little bit long or a little bit short, not off to the side or like way short or way long. So that's encouraging, and I think that's a good sign that this guy isn't far away. And I think it's just a matter of we need to collect more information. And once he figures out that footwork and cleans up those technical pieces, I think he has the form. To me, isn't a huge concern in his long-term projection as a shooter.
Tim, what would whether it's statistically or otherwise, in your mind, what would constitute a successful season for Lonzo?
Overall, or are we talking like 3-point percentage, or
Just overall, like I guess like certain markers that are attainable, that are reasonably attainable, that, you know, if he can do X, Y, Z type thing, this is what would be a reasonable expectation for a successful season for him, whether that's statistically or otherwise?
I think that's a good question. I think if he can shoot between like 35% from three, I'd consider that pretty good based on some of the projections I've seen. They had him in like the 35% range. So if he can show us that he has that baseline, this isn't like a 28% three-point shooter, that would be nice. I'd love to see him show success utilized off of screens, being able to be successful there above the 50th percentile, I guess, points per possession. In those off-screen looks, being able to distribute out of the pick and roll above average. And when I'm thinking of the efficiencies in the different areas, to me, it's not, okay, he needs to score this many points per possession exactly, or he needs to have this assist to turnover ratio. It's more about how he compares to the rest of the league in that percentile. And I think if he can hover around average and league average for a lot of the different scoring areas, and distributing the ball and not turning it over, I think that would be a success for a rookie guard going into a team that's one of the worst in the league, not in the most fantastic situation. I think with the usage that he'll have, if he can hover around league average, shooting the ball, scoring off the pick and roll, passing out of the pick and roll, and shooting off of screens, I think that'd be pretty successful in my eyes.
Same question to you, Darius. What constitutes a successful season for Lonzo?
I would just say that what we saw from him in preseason was a player who belonged. And on several nights, he looked like, if not the best player, then one of the best players on the floor. And that's playing one of the toughest positions in the league in general. Granted, in an environment that is probably geared more towards his style of play. But even in saying that, we've seen plenty of guards who come in and they're like, I'm not sure about you. And he was not one of those guys. So for me, yes, all the stats that Tim was talking about and sort of the way that he's used, and not necessarily points per possession markers, but sort of hovering in the right sort of levels of percentiles relative to his peers and to the rest of the league, that stuff is certainly important. For me, I want to make sure that on a night-to-night basis, playing in the NBA and against pretty much stiff competition every single night, that he doesn't look overwhelmed. Lonzo carries himself a certain way. His facial expressions, he's very sort of low affect, where he's not really giving you much in terms of emotion, and you really sort of don't know where he stands from like a body language perspective. But if he's getting beat off the dribble every single night, and he's a poor defender, if he's not able to beat guys off of the dribble, especially on plays where he's facing hard closeouts, is he able to sort of create enough space to get off his own jumper when he's working in isolation, or even in the pick and roll when there are switches against big men? These are things that show up on film, more so than they show up in the numbers. It's like what Tim was saying earlier about, like, these are good misses. And so for a player like Lonzo, I'm much more of a process guy versus a results guy, because in the long term, I think the results are going to be there. But early in his career, I want to see some process things that sort of show me that he's going to be successful. So give me hints of that this year, or sort of strong inclinations, like, which is even more than hints, and I'm going to feel good about him regardless of what his numbers say. Because like Tim was saying, and I'm sure that we'll get into when we talk about the rest of the roster, this isn't the most talented team. And I feel like Lonzo is going to get better and better as the players around him improve as well.
I'm kind of in the middle of you two in terms of the perspective of both the process and then the statistical components of it. For me, I want him to show signs of being great at what he's supposed to be great at. And what that is that he's able to affect the entire team, right? I want him to infect the squad with that passing, his presence, having wings running the lanes really hard, having rim runners run really hard in transition, everybody cut hard because they know they'll get the ball if they're open. To me, the one stat that I'm really going to be looking at and crediting Lonzo or blaming Lonzo with is the team's offensive rating when he's on the court versus when he's not on the court. And even so, if he infects the team when he's not on the court, that should still be good too. But I expect if Lonzo is what I think he is, even early on, he's going to bump up the entire offensive efficiency of the roster. And I think he can do that while still learning footwork things, kind of learning. He needs to get better at the more technical aspects of basketball. But what he has that makes him so brilliant is that ability to get guys open, to just, like I said, infect an entire team. If people watched UCLA 2 years ago versus what they were with Lonzo on the team, they will tell you as adamantly as anybody just what an overall culture change he was able to inject into the team. And I think that the team's offensive rating when he's on the court is going to be probably the most indicative of that. Let's move on over to his backcourt mate, who's out for the first 2 games, but kind of the surprise acquisition of the summer, and that's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Tim, he's a guy that, when the Lakers signed him, you dug up some data and that demonstrated that he wasn't quite the defender that he has the reputation for being. The other day, I was at practice, and right after the media scrum, had a conversation between me, Luke, and Bill Oram. And Bill asked Luke, like, hey, who's been really good, who we haven't talked much about? And Luke volunteered. It was a rhetorical question. Luke volunteered KCP, and Bill was going to talk about Thomas Bryant actually, but Luke is very high on what KCP brings to the table, and is actually very bullish on him defensively. He was a guy who was very complimentary of him. So, with all of that said, Tim, have you seen anything, or is there anything in the preseason data that maybe a little more optimistic about KCP?
There is, and again, just with everything that I might be bringing up today from preseason, these are all small samples, but what I saw was pretty encouraging. And it's funny, the 2 guys who really stood out were KCP and then also Josh Hart, who I also kind of ragged on about his defense. But so KCP, as a primary defender, opponents were 10 for 30 shooting against him. His defensive points per possession was in the 72nd percentile. He only gave up 2 makes on 10 shots. With a couple turnovers, defending the pick and roll, and opponents were 3 for 15 shooting jump shots against him. So he's played really well so far. Again, just 6 games, but it looks a lot better than like last year and going back a year before, and trying to sort through when he was injured, when he wasn't injured. Even then, he still only really looks like an average defender, maybe an average to slightly above average, but he's looked pretty good so far. So I think the signs are there.
I've liked what I've seen from him defensively. He competes. He really does sort of get into guys and pressure the ball. And what I liked about him as well is that he seemed to be in the right place more often than not, which the Lakers are habitual overhelpers. And I think KCP can be guilty of that a little bit too. But he seems to be much more disciplined than any of the Lakers guards defensively have been in I feel like years, really. Way more so than Nick Young, head and shoulders above Jordan Clarkson or guys like D'Angelo Russell and whoever else you want to name, even throw in late year Kobe Bryant. You know, he just sort of knows where he's supposed to be. He leverages his tools well defensively. I really like the way that he's sort of fighting over screens. He uses good technique there. And so in terms of my expectations defensively, like, I hope that he guards point guards more. I hope that he's a guy that if the Lakers are playing like a heavy screen and roll team, that they put him on the guy who's going to be handling the ball a lot in those situations, because I think that he's going to prove to be a good player in those situations. Offensively, I'd like to see him hit a few more shots. I don't know what the numbers say on that front, Tim, but I feel like he got a fair amount of open to fairly open 3-point shots, and they just weren't falling at a high enough rate for my taste. And I feel like if the Lakers are going to be effective as a team offensively with that starting group, a lot of it's going to depend on whether or not KCP can actually be someone who makes defenses pay for the help that Lopez is going to draw, for the way that defenses are going to play Lonzo. I think that KCP is going to get some opportunities, and so my expectations for him, it's hard for me to say, but he's going to need to be a league average three-point shooter, and higher than that on open three-pointers. Like, I'm hoping he's shooting 38 to 40% on corner threes, because that's a shot that he's going to get a lot of.
I think that, especially in half-court situations, I think that this is going to be a rough year for guys who are dependent upon other guys to create shots for them, of which KCP is that type of player. I don't think that there is that scorer with gravity that's going to be able to pull guys to him. I think that KCP will be able to run and fill lanes and spot up and fit in with Lonzo in that respect. And I do think that this is going to be a very good transition team, and we've already seen that they're going to try and run as much as any team we've seen, you know, at least in the synergy era. But I have a hard time envisioning KCP in that 38 to 40% range, because what I think is going to happen a lot is we're going to be in a lot of offensive possessions where a good shot is not created and that clock is ticking, and whatever guard has the ball has to jack up a pretty low percentage shot. And I think KCP is going to be somewhat of a victim of that. On the defensive end, I think it's important to have a player of his type. I'm still a little bit skeptical in that, from watching film of the preseason, he's a guy who gambles a lot. That kind of comes with the territory of a guy who likes to heat up the ball a little bit and that's going to go for steals. But he reaches a lot, and the defense got compromised a few times as a result of that. He's the kind of guy where defensively his contributions are very apparent. His deficiencies are quiet, but they're there and they're important. And if he's on the ball and he's reaching on a guy, and then that ends up setting off that chain reaction of the help defender has to come over, even if it ends up on the opposite side of the court and it's an open corner three, it's him who started the compromise of the defense. That said, I do think it's important to have a guy who can do what he does, and I think that it kind of elevates the rest of his teammates to up the intensity defensively, and I think and hope there's going to be some benefit from that, but I remain a little bit on the skeptical side. Tim, from the offensive perspective, what do you see out of KCP?
So to get to what Darius was talking about, KCP shot 4 for 18 so far from 3 in catch and shoot situations. Nine of those were contested. 9 of those were wide open. When he was contested, he shot 1 for 9. And like we talked about, a lot of those were end of shot clock, the ball handler kicks it out to him, and he's not really open because nothing was really going on, but he's kind of open enough and the shot clock's running down where he has to take that shot, and he was 1 for 9 in those situations. And then when he was open, he was 3 for 9. So again, tiny samples, but he was an above average shooter last year. He was in the 54th percentile in Detroit last season, which is much better than his 9 for 29 overall so far in preseason. So I think we'll see more shot making than we've seen so far, but I don't think we should expect him to be a Nick Young or Lou Williams kind of shooter. And it doesn't seem like you are.
Yeah, no, I'm not expecting that for sure. But what what does constitute a successful season for him?
If he could shoot above average, I mean, it'll be great if this team can have as many above average shooters as possible. So if he can duplicate that 54th percentile points per possession as a jump shooter, that would be good, because that means we have another guy to kick the ball out to and know that he can at least return what we're expecting like a starter in the league to return. If he can do that, if he can be an active defender, if he can narrow down those gambling opportunities and play a little bit better off-ball defense. His off-ball defense is interesting because sometimes it's perfect and it looks like he's in the great spot, and then he's in that great spot, but the defense realizes it and they easily kick it out and he's left exposed. So if we can see good on-ball defense from him, some discipline off-ball, if he can be a good off-the-screen shooter, that's something that the Lakers have used him in a lot so far. He's had 13 possessions where he's been running off of screens, catching and looking to shoot, which is 10 more than any other Laker this preseason. He's pretty much the only guy they've been doing that with consistently. So it seems as though that's something LA wants him to do. So he had 13 of those so far in 6 games. He only had 109 last year with Detroit in 76 games. So it's a newer development for him, but if that's the way it looks like he's going to be used, I'd love to see him again be above average in that role. I'm not expecting a ton from him, but if he can just be 55th or 60th percentile, I think that would be a good return on the investment we get from him, and then some above average defense.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing, that when we talk about like what a successful season looks like, part of this is coaching too. And so one of the things that you and I, Pete, have talked about a fair amount with KCP is and so I'll let you elaborate with this, but I want to see him with the ball in his hands a little bit more as a secondary playmaker in the screen and roll. The kid can pass, and he has good feel for timing and spacing and angles as a passer. I mentioned this in one of my recent posts, but he's had some really good pick and roll passes. He had some nice chemistry with Brook Lopez on a couple of plays in the game against the Clippers, the last preseason game. And he's shown similar chemistry with Julius Randle. Guys who, and I think that this comes down to the time that he had with Andre Drummond too, that he shows a comfort level with guys who are going to set a good screen and then get downhill on their roll. So if the Lakers are running more of those actions on secondary plays where the ball is swinging to him and then he gets a pick and roll, or he gets like a DHO with the guy who's giving the handoff, then trying to get downhill, I think that he can be effective like that. And so I want to see the coaches do more of that with him.
I was just going to say really quickly, roll men haven't missed a shot when he's passed them so far this preseason. So he's finding them, and when he is, they're good looks and they're converting.
How many shots is that?
4 for 4. Small sample.
Sure, small sample for sure. But he was a guy that was one thing that stood out to me from watching him in Detroit as well. This is not something he's just good at this year, and I don't think the data necessarily backed that up for last season on his passing. But just from watching the tape, he really knows how to make the proper read. And to me, like a KCP Lopez pick and roll, I think they're going to be able to get a good shot out of that almost every time, because however the defense wants to defend that, the versatility of both KCP and Lopez as the playmaker and the potential finisher on that are like, you're going to get a good shot out of that. Even if that's KCP making the skip pass, which he's very adept at. When we were having that conversation the other day, it was me, Bill, and Luke Walton. When Luke brought up, just kind of blurted out like KCP, first thing I said was like, I couldn't help myself. I was like, he's been really good on the pick and roll, and he kind of looked at me and nodded, and went back to talking about what we were talking about in Thomas Bryant and whatnot. But that's something that that's probably the thing I feel most passionate about, maybe aside from Brandon Ingram being a little bit misused. But if we can get KCP with the ball in his hands, that's definitely something that I want to see. So let's move on to Ingram. And he's somebody that we've covered a lot. And I want to talk about him outside of the Magic Johnson expectations. Magic set the narrative on Ingram that was really unfair. Like, I think it's our responsibility to not use that as the baseline expectation for whether or not Ingram's having a good season, or whether or not, or like gauging where he is right now. So, Darius, from a like not who we want Ingram to be, but from who he is perspective, what did you see from him over the course of this preseason?
A lot of bad, and then enough sprinklings of good that keep me anchored to my overall long view with him. And I don't necessarily think that this was even like Magic's comments, because I think Ingram's come out and said some of this himself, is that he was holding himself to a certain standard. And he has his own expectations as a player. And I think...
Sure, but he's 20, man. What does he even know at this point? And that's not a knock on him, but like...
No, I'm just saying,
what exactly can his expectations be?
Well, look, man. He was the number 2 pick in the draft. He's a highly confident player who put in a ton of work over the summer to get better. You know, he doesn't have a lot of life experience, right, to give context to how much he's supposed to improve, I guess. And yes, he's 20 years old, but I think that he closed the year, his rookie year, fairly strong compared to where he was when the season started. I think he then went into a summer where he put in a ton of work and was in the gym a lot. And that's not hype, right? I think that that's actually true. And I think that he was very eager to go out there and sort of show people, like, I'm better. And here's how. And when it didn't happen, I think that started to maybe impact him some. That said, when it did start to click for him, the last two and a half preseason games, he looked perfectly fine. He looked, when he's playing under control, when he's not being overly aggressive, he's got a really good feel, I feel like, for how to pass and what the open play is. And so when he's not hunting shots, I think that he's going to be perfectly fine. He looked like that the last 2 games or so, last 2 or 3 games.
So he started playing well as soon as he stopped trying to be something that he isn't. And that's this. So he played very well in the Utah game. And then in the last quarter, in his last shift of the game, he tried to be Kobe, and he failed miserably at it.
Yes.
I want to see him make more correct shot pass decisions. For example, in that Utah game, he drove against a soft hedge or a drop coverage with Gobert back in the paint. He had an available pull-up jumper on those, but he had missed his last couple, and I think that he's in a place where his confidence is kind of fragile. He hit his first couple, and then he missed a couple, and then the right decision off of that pick and roll when Gobert is hanging back in the paint is to shoot that pull-up jumper. I do care if he misses 10 in a row, right? But he needs to take the right shot, because if he's taking the right shot on those, keep working on those skills and keep working on those situations where eventually the repetition with good technique is you're going to start making those shots. But what he ended up doing was Gobert's hanging back in the paint and he drives right at him. And he looked really bad on those and he got them blocked. And he turned it over on another one when he, there were arms everywhere. He couldn't get the shot up. Those are the type of things that I want to see him make the right decision. I want to see him make the correct basketball play. And as you've said many times, that is his natural state. Like he has a ball mover's mentality. I would like to see him, when he's driving, be able to read the defense, not just as a shooter, but he was not a particularly good passer when he was being very aggressive earlier. And he had like a 1-to-4 assist to turnover ratio through the first, I think, 3 games that he played or so. And then as he started to let the game come to him a little bit more, that flipped, and you started seeing him get assists out of that. So for me, I think it's crucial that they let Ingram be exactly who he is right now and take him from where he is, not where they want him to be, where he is, and then take little baby steps every day to get a little bit better rather than throw the weight of the world or the Lakers world onto his shoulders and then expect him to do things that he can't do. Don't make him be out of character because you're not improving him at all when you do that. Tim, I would imagine that the numbers on Ingram were fairly disastrous over the course of the entire preseason, but was there anything in particular that stood out that you think is applicable going forward?
I think one thing that stood out to me and is consistent with what we saw all of last year and his full season at Duke was, and it kind of speaks to what you guys were just talking about, is he has never been a good off-the-dribble jump shooter. And that's something where if we want him to be able to make those right reads and trust himself to be able to just make the right basketball play, he's going to have to improve at that. And he struggled with that so far. He struggled with it last year. The only glimpse of time where he did a good job with that was for that post All-Star break last season, where he finally kind of had that clicking. And once he had that going, I think that helps the game come to him a lot more, and he was able to be comfortable making the right decisions and making the right calls. And he's a young player, and he'll continue to mess up here or there, but if he can have that comfort and know that he doesn't have to force everything to the rim, I think he can do a much better job with that.
In terms of statistical profiles, is it essential for a guy, if he's eventually going to be a go-to scorer type of guy, or is that off-the-dribble shooting something that a guy just has to have in his repertoire?
I'd say so, and this is something that you understand, just the different ways that you can defend, especially in the pick and roll, the different ways you can defend something like that. And you can kind of make the one thing that you give up to the offense be that mid-range shot. So if they're going to give that to you and you just can't hit it, it's really hard to be that primary scorer. So I think if he's going to make that leap, and it might not come at all this year, but if he's going to make that leap this year, maybe post All-Star break this year or next year, he's going to have to improve in that regard.
I think that if you're not going to have that off-the-dribble game as a go-to scorer, then you have to be a shooter the caliber of Ray Allen and Reggie Miller and Klay Thompson. Guys who are tireless and so technically precise as shooters, not only with their jump shooting form like above the waist, but like with their feet too. And Ingram has not shown enough of that to this point in his career to think that he's ever going to be this high quality, high volume shooter that doesn't have to take a lot of dribbles. So yeah, he's going to need to develop an off the dribble jump shooting game to complement his wants to get to the rim and finish at the basket.
Yeah, and I think if we're just looking at where he is right now and what he's able to do well at Duke last season and so far this year, he's been good when he's catching and shooting when he's open. He's able to knock down shots the way that we're hoping he can do, the way we're hoping KCP can do when we have Lonzo distributing and looking to kick out to guys. It looks like Ingram can be that kind of, you leave him open in the corner, he's going to make that shot. He shot 35% on open threes last year, so that's like, we'd like that to be higher, but that's okay. So we can use him that way. He's been good throughout his career, actually coming off of screens, which isn't what I would have at first thought to be the way to use him. The Lakers have used him off of a lot of like pin downs and dribble handoffs, and I think maybe KCP would be better for those kinds of things, and the way to use Ingram would be to have him off of a flare screen and try to get him an open shot, and if you have an awful closeout, then he can attack and look to attack the rack, or then distribute from that, not with just half a step on his defender, but 5-on-4 with his guy out of the picture.
Tim, are these synergy numbers in terms of his open shooting?
Yeah.
It's interesting because if we look at his NBA.com profile, which I believe is pulled from Synergy, correct me if I'm wrong, when it has him at either open, which they consider nearest defender 4 to 6 feet, or wide open, nearest defender 6 feet and beyond, one of those, I don't have it in front of me, but one of those was like 28%, the other one was 32%. So there's a disconnect there. If Ingram is in fact shooting 35%ish on open catch and shoot threes. I do think that's something to build on. I guess one of the things that I wonder about, whether it's statistically or otherwise, is like, what does Ingram, the good player, end up looking like? And I guess I'll ask myself the question first, though. What constitutes a good year for him? Is I want to see him be a productive 20-year-old wing. So I very much understand how physically underdeveloped he is. I understand, his circumstances, his age, the fact that he's probably thrust into a bigger role than is great for him at this point. But like Darius, you talk about him in a very holistic type of sense. You want to see growth. I want to get objective, hey, these are my expectations and I can measure it. Like, do you have any expectations for him that are solid? Like, for me, I want to be able to be like, this is what Paul George looked like when he was 20. This is what this guy looked like when they were 20. And that there are enough of those guys where it's like, yeah, he's like a middle of the pack of the guys that ended up being good. I want to be able to compare him. Do you have any similar expectations?
I'm going to say yes and no.
Of course you are, because that's what you do.
Yes, right. All sides, Pete. All sides. The guys who you just named, right, like a Paul George or even a Giannis, or those guys are go-to players. They are the MVP caliber type players, right? Like, I don't know if Paul George was ever going to be, Paul George is never going to win an MVP, right? Even at his best. But Paul George was the best player on an Eastern Conference finalist team that pushed LeBron's Heat pretty damn hard. And Paul George steps up in the playoffs, and he is a go-to scorer. I'm not sure if Brandon Ingram's ever going to be a go-to scorer like that. And this is, like, I said that he can average 24 points a game, and I guess that's possible still. But one of the guys who I've compared Ingram to even early on in his career was like Andrei Kirilenko. And one of the reasons why I compared him to Kirilenko is obviously like sort of build and things like that. He has very similar height and wingspan, like measurables. But I also saw very early with Ingram that he is very much a stat stuffer type of guy. That he can be sort of this like 16, 7, and 4 guy that gets you, a steal and a half and a block a game. And I think that he can be that within the next couple of years. Like, I really do. And so if you're asking me like, do I have measurable things that like things that we actually see or things that we can count, right? Like points and rebounds and assists. Yeah, like to me, if Ingram is a 42 or 43% shooter from the field this year, and he's averaging anywhere between 13 and 15 points, and getting you a handful of rebounds, and is a net positive in terms of like a passer, right? So it's just like assist to turnover ratio is either even or a little bit higher, like 2 to 1 or something like that, even if it's 1.5 to 1. That I'm gonna say he's on his way, because I think he's only going to continue to improve as a player as he gets more familiar with his body and how he can leverage his tools. Defensively, I do want to see, and this is counting stat stuff, but look, I want Ingram to average a steal a game.
You tweeted out the other day about like, what good is a 7'4" wingspan if you got your arms down, right?
Yes.
And that's the thing. Like, for me, his steals and his blocks and his steal rate and his block rate, those are two of the more important numbers. And it begs a question though: do guys develop in that sense? Like, my eye testy type of perception on that is that guys, you either come into the league with a good feel on how to get steals and use their length and create havoc with, steals, blocks, etc., or they don't. And it's not something that, like, I can't think of guys that did not know how to use their length when they were young, but developed into knowing how to do it when they were older. I'm sure there are examples. They just don't come to my mind. So that's something that concerns me. And that's something that he needs to show me this year for me to have that degree of confidence that, hey, this is a guy that can wreak havoc with that wingspan. He's got to put up those numbers in order to do that.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Pete, I haven't studied if those progress over time, but I know that like 538 has their Carmelo projections, and one of the inputs that they use is steal percentage, and they have block percentage, and these are things that they've found in their formula of like 10 or 12 different important factors to be to help them project looking towards the future. So they've found some statistical significance in moving forward, and from this point we expect him to be at this point. And when you pull up Ingram's profile on there, he has just a really bad steal percentage, 1.1%. His block percentage is a little bit above average, but I'm sure when you adjust for his length, it's probably pretty atrocious. And those are some of the reasons why they have him labeled as a project instead of like a budding star, or not budding star, but like a future star, or whatever their different categorizations are.
Yeah, so that's going to be something that's important to see this year. All right, let's move on to probably the most, or definitely the most surprising projected starter this year, and that's Larry Nance. We did a roundtable over at formblueandgold.com this week, and I think, was it unanimous, Darius, where all of us had Randle as the guy that should be starting at the 4?
Yeah, I said that Randle's the obvious choice, and then I argued for Nance. So
let's start there. What is the argument for Nance?
I think that Nance plays, so I said this earlier about Lonzo, but I really think this is true about Nance, is that Nance plays better when the players around him are better. And I think that last year you could make an argument that Nance was perfectly slotted on the bench unit, but the bench unit for the Lakers was actually really good. Their net ratings were some of the highest in the league for 5-man units when, in terms of efficiency differentials, when all 5 of those bench players played. That was like Nance, and it was Tariq Black, and then for a while there, Brandon Ingram, and then Lou Williams and Jordan Clarkson. And so Nance was part of a really good unit as a reserve. When he's played with the reserve unit this preseason, Nance has basically disappeared, and he's looked really bad. And maybe it's a coincidence because, as Tim's been saying a lot this pod, like, of the small sample size. But once Nance moved to the starting lineup, and which coincidentally happened right when Brook Lopez came back, he started to look better. And I'm not saying that the Lakers should start Larry Nance to optimize Larry Nance. My point with this is, though, that Julius Randle's basically going to play his game regardless of where he's at. I'd prefer Randle start. Randle's the better player. But if you're going to get the same Randle, and maybe even in some situations a more optimized Randle going up against bench units, and while also bringing up the level of play that Larry Nance is going to offer you by flanking him with 4 better players than what he's going to find with the reserves, then you may end up with a win-win. Whereas if you have Randle starting and Nance playing, the way that he played during the early part of the preseason, you may end up with a win-lose. I know that we don't have any 5-man data with Randle playing with Brook Lopez, and I want to see Randle play with Brook Lopez to see if all of the ways that Brook Lopez is going to help every other player on the team that he plays with, that he can do the same thing for Randle. That said, I think that's the case for Nance. Nance is going to do fine on the backboards, I think, playing with a guy like Lopez, who is sort of this box-out maven, and who really is a space eater down there. And he's going to benefit as well from the spacing that Lopez offers and the attention that Lopez draws. I think that's the case for Nance. I don't necessarily think it's the strongest case in the world, but that's the case.
So, Tim, Nance has been one of the stronger guys statistically, at least in the metrics that I'm familiar with, has been one of the better players on the Lakers the last couple of years from that perspective. What are your thoughts on both him as a starter in the projected starting lineup and just overall, where do you see his contribution to this team?
I think overall, I think his scoring numbers are pretty good, and he has a pretty good assist percentage, and he's able to get other guys involved, but when we really break it down and look at the individual things and say, like, what does he bring to us on the court, like in the half court? He's not a good spot-up shooter. He's an okay roll man. He kind of has a good floater game. But he can get some putbacks. He can get some dump-offs. But it's tough to slot him into an offense and say, this is what you're going to do, and this is where you're going to be successful, unless it's as a screener who's going to slip screens and be able to finish off of those and clean up the glass. I was just looking at him against Randle, they both have similar rebounding numbers, or they did last year. Neither of them was fantastic jump shooting, and neither of them have really shown anything since then to separate themselves. One of the interesting areas that I think really leans strongly towards Randle, and I wanted to get your input on this, was Nance got out in transition much, much less than Randle did this preseason and then also last regular season. And I don't know if that's a matter of maybe he played maybe more 5 or something, and Randle was freer to leak out. But Randle was able to get out in transition 24 possessions this preseason, which led the team, whereas Nance was much fewer, I think like around 10, maybe less than 10. And I don't know if that's something that when we're looking at what groups we want them to play with, if we're going to have Lonzo in that starting group, I want a guy in there who's going to be able to take advantage of that transition ability and that great passing, and I think Randle will be able to do a much better job with that than Nance is. So that's another factor I think to consider.
Is the argument for Nance on the defensive end, do you think?
I think so, and that's one of the areas that I don't think the data last year matched up with what we saw watching him. I think he was a much better helper and secondary defender than a primary defender last season.
That's still true.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the value he brings. That as a cleanup man in transition, he's good when he's there, but he's not there as often. So I don't think that impact is felt as much as the percentile looks in synergy.
I'll save my, lament for, Randle starting to, when we get to him, which is funny with my, reputation with Julius Randle, but tape don't lie, dude's played well, but we'll get to that in a moment. For me, and this is something that I am battling with myself about, Nance to me seems like the same dude that he's been since his rookie year. And I think by the time you get into the third year of watching a guy, to me, Julius Randle is still interesting to me. He can drive me crazy sometimes, but there are fluctuations in his game. There's been growth in his game, and he's always had this tantalizing talent where I've always said, if he just puts it together, if he just does a couple of things differently, he can really be something, and we'll get into that in a moment. Whereas Nance to me looks like the exact same dude, and that's not necessarily the worst thing. I just wonder if I'm kind of bored of Larry Nance at this point as a fan, and I'm not giving him his just due. I'm really flummoxed about what's going on with the 4 position and with what Luke is trying to do with that. I would like to at least get some lineup data with Lopez and Randle together. In terms of what Nance brings to the table, he's a good passer in maybe a different way than Randle is. Randle can create shots, whereas Nance is going to make the correct read, whereas sometimes it takes Randle that extra beat to catch and be like, oh, where am I supposed to go with it, and then delivers it. Whereas Nance is pretty good at in fact, he overpasses, right? This is something that we always talk about, shoot the ball, Larry. For me, for Nance to be able to have an extra degree of value in the starting lineup, I'd like to see him shoot the threes that he was shooting at the end of last season. That shouldn't just be a end of last season type of thing. If Nance could get to a respectable percentage on just wide open shots, give me 30%, 30, 31, somewhere in there. You can put lineups out there with Nance that have 5 guys who can shoot on the court, at least to some degree. The Lakers aren't going to be a great 5-out type of team any way you slice it, but Nance can't be shooting those 20-footers. Hell, we had a podcast last year, right, where Darius and I were why aren't Nance and Randle shooting threes? And lo and behold, that week, it was okay, they can shoot threes now. It's what the hell? We cannot be starting from ground zero on that again. I think Nance took 1 or 2 threes this entire preseason. It wasn't many. And he's not popping to those, because the ability to pop to those shots, to those spots, creates space in driving lanes. The opening play against Utah, they ran a brush screen off of Nance at the top of the key, and Ingram got a layup off of a lob, right? It was a set play for Ingram. The reason that play worked is because Brook Lopez was standing in the corner, and Rudy Gobert didn't want to cheat that far off of him. Just the ability to just be a presence and be a threat has so many, and Lopez doesn't get any stat for that, but it creates so many opportunities that just Nance being able to be out there and be a presence in that respect, they can't go back to him popping out to 20 feet and then in the last 25 games of the season they shoot threes again. So I don't know. For me, Nance is a guy I think that I'm a little bit bored with, and I think I probably have an overly negative opinion about right now. I think that's coloring that for me. So I don't know, Darius. What's a successful season for him for you?
No, you're right. We're not just bored with Nance. That's not it, man. His game has not changed. And just like you said, on some levels, that's fine. Nance was picked 27th in the draft. The tantalizing talent that you're talking about with Randle, that's reflected in his draft position. So I think on a lot of levels, we do have to go back to sort of like pedigree and baseline of talent and evaluations. Right now, some of that stuff is going to get flipped on its head, especially when we talk about Kyle Kuzma. But we're not talking about Kyle Kuzma yet. We're talking about Larry Nance. So, look, Nance needs to start doing the things that he needs to do to sort of grow his game within the context of what his talent level is. And so, no, it's not overly harsh to say that Nance should either be rolling super hard to the basket or he should be popping to spaces on the floor that optimize spacing within the Lakers offense. Now, part of that's going to be coaching, but part of that is Nance, actually working within the things that he was supposedly working on over the summer. Nance still isn't great at the point of attack as a defender. We talked about this a couple of pods ago, just in terms of like centers, like just eating him up, and not even like really good centers, just everyday average like rotation level centers. Nance needs to get better, man. This isn't a thing where we're like, oh well, we're bored with Larry Nance. No, Larry Nance is making us bored with him.
I think all that's fair, man. All that's fair.
I think he does have a chance, though. If we're looking at if we want him to be able to be good enough at spacing the floor and have that impact that P were just saying that Brook Lopez can have just standing in the corner. If we're looking at wide open 3-point shooting, catch and shoot last year, Julius Randle shot 23.1%, 9 for 39. Larry Nance Jr. shot 35.7%.
There we go. Do that.
Yes.
If he can just do that, and then also, like you were just saying, roll really hard and be able to catch those lobs, or at least roll hard enough to create some pressure and make the defense respect that he's doing his job.
Yes. But part of that is mindset. And there's an aggression, there's a switch that needs to flip with him. And so I'm not saying he's not capable. That, in fact, like that's not my point at all. And I started out talking about Nance, that he plays better when better players are on the floor. My hope is that, look, if you're going to start Larry Nance, then good. Surround him with the in theory, the best players that the Lakers have to offer, which is, the other 4 starters at each of their positions, and then go from there and get him to do the things that I think he's proven that he's capable of doing. He just needs to do them with more confidence, which he has admitted himself is a problem for him.
I mean, it's the same conversation we've been having for 3 years, though. Don't talk about it, be about it. Like, I want to see it from him in that respect. And if it continues to be a problem, it's going to continue to be a problem for the team. I don't want to come off like I think Nance is a bad player, but I think that due in part due to his personality, he's a super likable guy. He's been able, and his draft position, but I don't know, man, like that dude's got a lot of physical ability and he's smart. Like a guy who's that athletic, who is that intelligent, and who's that big, right? Like I would normally say, yeah, well, you got to have skills too. But at his size, at a 4 or a 5 type of position, you don't necessarily have to be a great ball handler or a great shooter. If you can hit that 35.7% on just wide open threes, good enough for me.
Look what Taj Gibson is doing.
Perfect.
For Minnesota.
Perfect.
The one game that we saw from the Timberwolves, Taj Gibson was stretching to the corner to shoot 3-pointers, and I'm like, where the hell did this come from with Taj Gibson? Now, Taj Gibson to me has a very similar profile to Larry Nance in terms of, yes, Taj Gibson went to USC and Larry Nance went to Wyoming. But besides that, right, like veteran college player, drafted in the 20s, sort of made his bones as like a defensive player who is smart and just knows how to play. It's taken Gibson sort of a long time to sort of get with the program, but the league has changed while Gibson has been in the league. Nance is a third-year player, and like the revolution is going on right now. He needs to get with the program a little bit and sort of like model his game after current guys who are doing it now.
Amen. Very well said. Well, let's move on to the last member of the starting lineup. It's Brook Lopez. For me, he's been a guy who's, in the time that he's gotten, he's been as advertised. I think he's, really central to what the Lakers are going to want to do on the offensive end in half-court situations. I think things started looking a little less disastrous the moment that he stepped on the court. I think that he's a dependable defender and that he's going to do well at the things that he's good at. And you know exactly what those are. He's rarely going to be out of position. From seeing him at practice, he's he's like kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, but he's got a bit of a streak to him. The thing that's kind of struck me about being at Lakers practice is it's very loose. Like the guys are having a lot of fun. They're talking a lot of crap. It's very competitive, which is good. But there are some things that, and again, I come from a high school background, where part of it's like helping raise young men and things like that. And so I know I'm probably a little stodgy on it, but like if a guy like does something silly, like he'll like fall on the floor and be silly. And like I know if you do that in a high school gym with most coaches or even in a college, it's like, man, get up. Like what are you doing? And I'm a rookie at walking into NBA practices, and I know that it's, like, what the hell do I know, right? And I'm applying a totally different experience. So I get all of that. Lopez is, like, has a bit more of the, like, he's the adult in the room in a lot of senses. I've gotten that sense from Bogut as well, who we'll get into later. But Lopez is kind of one of the adults that can still play, because that's the thing about a guy like Deng or Brewer or those other guys. Lopez is better than the other dudes that are kind of a little sillier and younger and dancing and all of that, right? Like Lopez is going to be more productive than them. So I think he's going to be important just not only on the court, but off of it in terms of kind of helping raise these guys in that the last couple of years, Lakers have not had a veteran who is a locker room presence and could play. Like signing Meta to be your 15th man is all fine and well, but like he can't bust your ass in practice. Brewer can maybe pressure the ball a little bit, but Brewer, Deng, guys like that, like Lopez, if you're screwing around, Lopez is going to embarrass you. And so that's something that I've been excited from being in the room on, that he, I think he brings a certain amount of adulthood to practices that, that I think is necessary. Darius, what are your kind of overview on what Lopez brings to the table from the couple of games we got to see of him?
Yeah, I think that all of that is true. Look, Lopez is clearly the team's best player. And he's probably the best player they've had since Kobe, basically. I don't think that's a stretch, right? Am I stretching that?
That was like, no, I just like took a moment for the actual truth of that to set in.
Yeah.
And be like, wow, that's just...
Right.
And we're probably talking like pre-injury Kobe.
Well, I would say, probably since around there. And obviously, pre-injury Kobe was much better than Brook Lopez. So,
Jesus, we've been so bad for so long.
Hey, man, it's been a while. Anyways, we should pour out some liquor for the Lakers.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna go get a drink.
Yes,
keep talking
and spill it for me.
Jesus.
Look, Lopez is clearly the Lakers' best player, and when you say as advertised, that's exactly right. This dude. So just let me say this: this guy's a horse. I said it the first time I saw him, like the first preseason game that he actually suited up for. I was just like, this dude is big. He's big. He's got a soft touch. He knows how to score the basketball from all three levels, basically. And he does have a bit of that competitive streak to him. He's not as rugged or as rough as his brother, but you could tell that they're cut from similar cloths, even though, one came into the league as the top 10 pick, which was Brook, and then the other one kind of came in like a little bit of the more workhorse blue collar type of guy, which was Robin. But you could tell that they've had some sort of driveway battles. And Lopez brings that to the table. I'd like to see it in more stretches, but whatever. He's a really good player, and he's going to help the Lakers a ton offensively and even defensively. Like, I don't know what the tape says, Pete. I don't know what the numbers say, Tim, but I didn't see him making a lot of mistakes out there defensively. I don't know if he's going to be as good of a defender as like Andrew Bogut, right, who at his peak was one of the best defensive centers in the league for like the period of time that he was in, that he's been in the NBA. But Lopez is competent on that end, which I mean, I was on Nate Duncan's podcast doing the Lakers season preview, and one thing that I said about the difference between what Lopez brings to the table defensively and what Mozgov does is, or did for the Lakers last season, is that Mozgov made a fair amount of mental mistakes that where if you look at them on film, you're like, what are you doing? And I haven't seen a lot of that from Lopez to this point. Now, maybe all it takes is time, and the sample's small, and so those things are coming. But I think he's going to help the Lakers a fair amount offensively and not be a sieve defensively, which for a guy who's bringing as much to the table as I expect him to offensively, that's going to be important.
Yeah, I think if we're just looking at what he can bring from a numbers perspective, defensively, his primary defensive data looks pretty good. He's in the 70s there as far as percentile, and he's a good post defender. He's about an average container of the pick and roll. But when we're looking at his on-off court impact, and I just pulled up ESPN's defensive real plus minus, he was 45th out of 59 centers in that rating. So I think that could tell us a little bit about what he does as maybe a rim protector, as kind of a secondary defender and altering shots and being able to do things like that. But just from the primary defensive data, it looks pretty good. I think on the offensive side of things, I mean, it's pretty simple. He can roll, he can pop. He's a really good post player, and he can spot up pretty well. He shot 37% from three when he was open last year. Only 28% when he was contested, but that's still pretty good for a starting center. And that's enough to do that job and create that gravity to be able to pull away a Rudy Gobert or a Hassan Whiteside or one of those guys. I think as a roll man, his versatility, popping and rolling, it adds a lot and will be able to make Lonzo better in the pick and roll, make Jordan Clarkson or KCP or whoever else we have running it more effective, because he will pressure the defense in that way where Larry Nance kind of standing around, not sure what to do, standing around in mid-range, won't be able to do the same thing. The way we saw him used this preseason, I think, was encouraging. I was a little worried that all of a sudden we'd throw him into the mix and we'd be running just some ISOs for him or things like that. And we only saw one ISO possession this preseason from him, which is good. We saw him do well in the post. He shot pretty well. Last year, he was actually in the 98th percentile off the dribble shooting on about 70 shots. So that's an interesting thing. He might be our most effective off the dribble jump shooter. I remember him making one shot this preseason, kind of bailing out a poor read from Ennis, but he had like a contested off like one leg fadeaway mid-range shot that he drilled. So yeah, like you said, like Lopez is going to be our best guy. And he's got the versatility and he's got everything that you would want from a starting center in the NBA to be able to kind of be the core piece that we can build this team around, not just because he can score well, but he can also set up others well because of the rolling and because of the popping and because of the floor spacing that he brings.
Yeah, he's a guy that, God help us if he goes down. You know, like he's so dependable in the areas that he's dependable, and he has such an impact. The other night, I think 4 of Ingram's 5 assists were to Lopez, and he opened the floor up for Ingram in a way that, and he's done that for other guys, that he's really a guy that if something happens to Lopez, if those back issues flare up, like Lakers are going to be in a really bad spot, and it puts a lot of the young, important guys that are important to the Lakers' future in the position to look really bad. So, all right, let's move on to the bench. Let's start with our man Julius. We've been kind of dancing around that for a bit, but Darius, you've been one of the leaders of that bandwagon for a while. What have you seen from him in the preseason, and how does it project into the regular season?
So remember when we had his trainer, Wallace Caesar, on our pod, and he was just saying that Randle really is in the best shape of his life, and the pictures are real. And look, it's making a difference, man. So Tim mentioned earlier that Randle's had, I can't remember the number, Tim, like 24
yeah,
transition opportunities. And can you, Tim, jump in here for a second? When you say transition opportunities, what does that mean exactly? Like, he got a shot up, or he created a shot for someone else? Can you explain that a little bit?
So those 24 are ones that he was the one taking the shot or had the turnover or got fouled. He had 1 assist in transition, and then 15 shots, 10 makes, a couple turnovers, and he got fouled a bunch in transition.
So
If I can jump in as well, like the 1 assist is not particularly indicative of his passing. If you remember, early in training camp, Luke had a rule on the 4s and 5s where they had to outlet the ball to guards. And I thought Randle did an exceptional job of that. That's usually not going to lead to an assist, but I would venture a guess that he catalyzed several other transition opportunities where it wouldn't have been reflected in the box score.
what I was going to say is that those 24 transition opportunities are probably half or even less than half of the number of times that he's simply just busted his ass up the court and beaten his man to the front of the rim. Now, he's not necessarily getting the ball in those situations, but Julius Randle's running hard. He's running hard offensively and changing ends like a madman. And so I brought up, just him being in shape, because to me, that's showing up in ways that you can't necessarily count in a box score or even in synergy, just because he is out there just playing harder for longer. Tim, you wrote a really good piece at the site about 25 stats from the preseason, and one of the things that stood out to me was just the level that Randle's been playing at defensively when guarding his own man, and like how often he's fouling in those situations, which used to be like a really bad habit for him in terms of like him picking up fouls. Randle just looks good to me. Like if you're going to say that Lopez has been, is like clearly the Lakers' best player, at this point, I would say Randle's their second best player. He's played like it this preseason, at least. Probably right there with Kuzma. Like if we're going to, talk about like counting stats and things like that, and just like the impact that he's had, Kuzma's been fantastic too. But Randle's doing a lot out there, man. And like, look, I know that every time we talk about Randle, the cape comes on, and so I'm gonna stop at this point and let Pete talk about the crow that he's been eating this preseason with my guy Julius Randle.
I'm thrilled, brother. It's so good to see. It's so good to see what he's doing. But I'm conflicted because I'm now frustrated at Luke, and honestly, and if you're around Randle, like he ain't happy with this either. Now the starting job it's mostly ceremonial. I'd like to see when the Lakers get down into a close game down the stretch. I'm pretty sure Julius Randle's going to be on the court, but I'm not positive. But I still think he's going to get comparable minutes, and that may be just a difference in title rather than actual usage. That being said, a few things are rubbing me the wrong way about this. He did what was asked of him over the course of this summer in terms of improving his body. The only thing where he hasn't hit a level of improvement to me is his 3-point shot, but all of the things that you mentioned, he's in great shape. He's great rim runs. He's outletting the ball. He's giving a consistent effort on the defensive end in ways that he never has before. All of these things were things that I've been saying all along, like he needs to do this, this, and this in order for me to be a little more bullish on him. He's been doing those things. I think one thing that hasn't been talked about enough in regards to Randle is that he's doing fewer dumb things. And I got my saying, like, sometimes basketball is about the absence of bad plays rather than the presence of good ones. He's taking fewer, and Tim, you hit on this in your 25 stats about the preseason piece. Like he's reduced his isolation percentage, how frequently he's doing that. He's become a scorer in transition and a playmaker in the half court. And that is exactly like the type of player that he should be. He's been, they've been using him at the top of the key and making those reads with guys coming off of screens. He was good at that last year too. So he's done just about everything that they've asked of him. I would get it if they saw a lineup with Randle and Lopez together and they decided that it didn't work, but they literally have no tape on that. Why make the change before you get a chance to see that? And if you're going to make the change before, like outside of Lopez, why not start the preseason out with Nance as the starter anyway? Like they've given him what he's playing some of the best ball of his career in preseason, and I get it, in shorter minutes and all of that, but he's played very well. Is that the message you want to send to that guy? And from being around him, you could tell he's not happy with it. He's still playing hard, but I don't know. I've been really uncomfortable with how this has been handled. Tim, what's your perspective on his performance and kind of what he's been bringing to the table?
I think he's played well so far, and like you said, he's done everything that's been asked of him. And I'm in grad school now, and some of the stuff we're learning about is leadership and motivation and how to best utilize talent and develop talent. And one of the things that we touch on is making sure that the link between the process and the rewards is clear. And if what Randle was told is you need to do 1, 2, and 3, and he did all of those things, and then the work that he's putting in to get to the point where he is now doesn't equal more playing time or that starting role, all of a sudden you're breaking all of those relationships. And in his mind moving forward, the link between putting the work in to get where they want him to be might not equal that end goal that he's looking for, which is more opportunity. So it's just not a good way to motivate your players. I think in such a, like, it's pretty trivial who starts the first couple games. We could make a move 3 or 4 games in. So I don't see why you wouldn't go with a guy who's made so many of these obvious changes. But in the same sense, I'm not in there. I'm not in the locker room. I'm not able to see practices, maybe like you've been able to see, Pete, or maybe in also the media is locked out of most of the stuff that's going on. So maybe Nance is making some of those same changes. But to me, those changes are so obvious in the data. And you talked about his isolation frequency, and it used to be what he did most on offense in the half court, and now he's barely doing it. He's much more involved as a passer and spotting up and posting up and as a roll man and as a cutter, putbacks, all of these different things. Whereas before it was a lot of get it to Randle and then the ball stops and the play stops and the defense is able to key in on him. And even when he had those isolations in the post, he wasn't facing up like we all wanted him to do. But now he's kind of adjusted and he's making those changes stylistically. He's made those changes from an effort and a physicality standpoint. And I just want to see him have that chance to have that production match what we're seeing and all the steps and all the things he's checking off to get him to where we like him to be.
Welcome to my side, everyone. I'm glad to have you all join me. On this podcast, I've been called by Pete a Randle hater. So maybe I've seen the light. We have jackets and buttons and lots of other stuff. Seriously.
All right, so I think we're all in agreement on Randle. I've been converted to the dark side. But no, man, like these are just things I've always wanted to like. I always saw the talent that's in Randle. I just think it's curious that his situation and standing on the team is changing right as he's starting to do those things that I've always wanted to see. I also think it speaks to, like, if you're going to draft guys after their freshman year of high school or freshman year of college, like, this is around the point where you start getting the fruits of that development. And, to start, like, it already happened with Russell, and they got Lopez out of it. They got some to clear cap space and whatnot, but to like start giving up on guys right as they get to this point, that 22, 23 age right there it'd be really unfortunate. But I do expect big things out of Randle this year. I think this is going to be a bit of a breakout season for him. So anyway, moving on. Let's do the man of the summer and preseason, Kyle Kuzma. He's somebody that I think he didn't play that great in his last game, and I think he cooled off from distance over the last few games. But he's someone who's just so advanced footwork wise, and Darius and I we waxed loquacious about this a couple of pods ago. But Tim, what is from the pure data, remove all of the hype, all of the ringer pieces and ESPN profiles and all of that, and what do the numbers say about Kyle Kuzma?
He's been really good. He, just like Randle, is tied for the lead-in transition opportunities with 24. I was hesitant to buy into Kuzma kind of because of the transition. In summer league, it seemed like almost all of his production was either in transition off of like a dunk or a wide open three or maybe a pick and pop three. But he's kind of shown that he can do all of those great things in the half court. And we've seen, like you said, that polish in his game. And I think that's been a really big thing for me to kind of be able to buy into the impact he's going to be able to make. And I think we've gone from, all right, this kid might be the backup third string, fourth string power forward to, wow, he might be our backup three, and we're all happy with that. If we're just looking at what he's been able to do, 93rd percentile finishing around the rim. He cooled off, like you said, shooting. He started off much better, but he ended up finishing in the 42nd percentile as a jump shooter. He shot 36% on open threes, which is good to see, 28% on contested threes. But I think he was a guy where the eye tests and what he was able to do for most of the preseason looked really, really good and has me really excited about what he can do.
How about you, Darius? What do you see from him?
Yeah, I mean, look, you made a video saying Kyle Kuzma's legit, and he is. Like, I don't know what else to really say about him that we haven't said, like, time and time again. The kid can play. I think what Tim was saying in terms of the data reflecting, like, sort of more versatility in the preseason than what was maybe in terms of, like, how he's scoring the ball than and having more varied opportunities in the half court than what he did during the summer. Like, I've seen that. But I was not convinced at all that him playing any small forward was going to be in his or the team's best interest. I thought that it might be putting him in a position to not be as successful. I thought that he was a 4/3 more than a 3/4. And now I think I'm firmly in the camp that he's really just a 3.5. That he's basically a chameleon between the forward spots. I think that you could slot him in any Lakers lineup and he'll be fine. I think that if for some reason if Brandon Ingram, had to miss a game or two, you could start Kyle Kuzma at small forward and it would not be a problem. And then I think that if in that specific game, if the first sub out was going to be Larry Nance, and then they brought in Jordan Clarkson for Larry Nance, that he would then be fine playing small ball power forward, and that his skill set is that varied and is that timely for today's NBA, that I just think that the Lakers found themselves a player who, regardless of what they need from the forward position, he seems to be a guy who can do what they'll need him to do. And to find a guy like that at number 27, it's kind of crazy to me.
He was sort of an out-of-nowhere steal of the draft, but when I was actually able to spend some time the other day looking through some of his Utah film and go deeper into the data, I really liked what I saw, and I saw a lot of the same things that we're seeing now. That chameleon aspect of him being able to play different roles depending on what the team needed and depending on the situation was something that was really apparent. He was able to pick and pop, and if there was a switch, he was burying guys in the post, and he was scoring at will against guards, which I think is something that we've seen glimpses of so far. If you take away, he started off the year last year at Utah 4 for 20 shooting threes, and most of those shots were kind of normal college level threes. And then there was just some point in time where he made a change, and you can see it in the data and on the film. All of a sudden, he started taking NBA distance threes, and it's really easy to see because nobody else is really doing that. And all of a sudden, Kuzma's out there. This is your power forward taking threes, 2 or 3 full steps behind the 3-point line. And if you take away those first 20 shots of the year, he shot 42% for the rest of the season from 3. So that shooting was there, and the ball handling that we've been able to see just a little bit of. He handled the ball a lot more at Utah than I just figured that he would. So I don't know if the polish was quite there, as much there at Utah as it is now, but a lot of these similar usages and versatility that we're seeing from him, and another part of the reason why I'm excited about him is something that was there a year ago, and credit to our scouting department for finding that.
Absolutely. I've covered him a lot, and I released the video that Darius alluded to, so I don't want to repeat a lot of those points. I want to talk about him more from a long-term perspective and what he can accomplish this year that's applicable to the rest of his career and kind of the role that he may fill for Laker teams, 2-3 years down the line. I want him to get up as many shots as possible this year. He's a guy who his footwork allows him to get NBA caliber shots up in just about any situation. And I want him to explore those situations and get those reps where he learns like, oh, hey, this is a bad shot, but this is a good shot. Or this is a good time to exploit the defense by the pass because I'm creating, gravity, I'm creating help defenders are dropping onto me. We saw Ingram, for example, be the go-to guy down the stretch of that Utah game. I don't care that he's a rookie. I don't care that he was drafted later in the draft. I want Kuzma to be the guy that's given the ball in those situations. And if he fails in those, that's fine. But his skill set and his footwork at his age are worthy of those types of touches and those types of experiences, because all he's missing right now are those reps. There was a possession against the Clippers where they had run a delay, and Luke was saying, on the sideline, if the big hangs back, you pop out to the corner, you fill corner. Just little things like that where that's not going to be something that he has to think about at some point. Once he gets a certain amount of reps, he's going to know, hey, I need to do the, if this happens, then that. There's a lot of if-thens that you can tell a player, all you want, but really at the speed that the NBA game happens at, it has to become ingrained to a certain degree in order for them to go, oh, okay, yeah, that's just something that I do naturally. They don't even have to think about it. So for me, that's one thing. That's what I really want to see out of Kuzma this year, is put him in as many situations, even if they're a little bit uncomfortable, and not a lot of them will be, but give that guy a lot of touches because that's something that can really pay off for them down the line. All right, let's move on to Jordan Clarkson, everyone's favorite veteran Laker. He and Randle actually are now the longest tenured Lakers, which is pretty crazy to think about. I actually thought JC was decent this preseason. I think he's a guy that it's easy to overlook what he's done well and kind of easy to point out what he hasn't done well. Luke kind of alluded the other day in a media scrum to kind of trying to cut out the 6-7 dribble type situations when referring to Clarkson. Now, how successful he'll be, I don't know, but he is the one guy out of the backcourt guys that can go get his own shot. Now, how efficiently, remains to be seen. I don't know, Tim, did you find anything interesting on him?
No, just everything he did pretty well. He was good in transition. He was 5 for 6 as a cutter. He shot well. He finished well. In the pick and roll, he was 9 for 14 scoring, so 89th percentile points per possession there, and then also distributing from that. The guys he was passing to out of that, whether it's a roll man or spot up shooter or cutter, were 7 for 12 on his kickouts. So he was pretty productive in the pick and roll. He's always been a good scorer there, going back to his Missouri days, where that was where he did most of his offense. But if he can flash, and he flashed a little bit of it, if he can pass the ball like we haven't seen since maybe his rookie year, I think that would be a big step forward for him. We know he's a good scorer. We know he can score in the pick and roll. He can score in isolation. He can score off of screens. But if he can add that passing element, I think that allows you to use Lonzo or Ennis or Caruso, if he gets in there, more off ball. and allows you to do different things and have him as a secondary creator in different plays, and just opens up a lot more if we can trust him not to pound the ball into the ground 6, 7, 8 times and force up a shot. But if he can be a good part of a ball-moving offense that makes good decisions.
Darius, is he somebody that you can watch with kind of a fresh eye on him, or is he somebody that, how I was saying earlier about Nance, like I feel like I've been watching the same guy and I'm a little bit bored of him. I kind of get that way about Clarkson too, and I think he's been a little better than we've given him credit for when I go back and watch the tape. But then when I'm watching the games live, I'm like cussing him out on Twitter, and it doesn't necessarily align with he may have made 5 good plays and then he makes one just disastrous play that drives me crazy. Are you able to, do you think, watch him fairly?
Yes, because so here's the thing is that I think that Clarkson is one of those players where his rookie season sort of skewed what our expectations were going to be for his career trajectory, and I think it's easy to sort of hold certain things against him. When it comes right down to it, what we've seen from Clarkson this preseason is more in line with what I think the player that fans and me personally want him to be more long term. I don't think you're ever going to, the old saying with like a leopard doesn't change his spots. That's going to be true with Clarkson. He's still going to pound it some. He's still going to isolate. He's still going to, instead of calling out an action to run, he's going to wave up his big man to come and set a screen, more often than not, because he wants to be a pick and roll player. And in the end, that's fine if when he turns the corner, he makes the extra pass every once in a while. And that he doesn't settle for the mid-range jumper, 2 out of 3 times. And this preseason, he's been making the extra pass more, and he's been not settling for the mid-range jumper like every single time when the drive is not there. And so I think we got to give Clarkson credit. Clarkson's never going to be, I don't think we're ever going to see rookie point guard Jordan Clarkson again. The guy with the 25% assist rate, and the guy who looks like he got, daily tutoring from Steve Nash. That guy's gone. Bye-bye to him. I think the last couple years, we've seen a fair amount of influence on Jordan Clarkson's game from Kobe Bryant and then from Nick Young. Kobe Bryant and Nick Young are no longer on the team. And I think that Clarkson, as much as anyone else on this roster, when you talked about sort of that culture changer that Lonzo Ball can be, and that sort of infusion and infection that can happen from like this new style that the Lakers want to play, if Clarkson just gets a twinge more of that in his game, I think that he can be useful for this team. And through the preseason, that's the guy I saw. He's not perfect. He's still going to make maddening plays that are frustrating just because you know that he can play a different way because we saw it when he was a rookie. But like I said, that guy's gone. I think on some levels it's just time to accept that he's going to be a scoring guard who can make the extra pass every once in a while, and some nights he's going to get hot and it's going to help the Lakers out. And I think that's fine.
I think in a roundabout way, having Randle with the second unit, I think Clarkson benefits from that the most. And the reason I feel that way is that he's a guy that I think if you just took out the dumb stuff that he does, like when he takes good NBA quality type shots, he's pretty good and he's pretty efficient. I don't know how you could possibly quantify that. You'd have to chart it, but he's a guy where, when he's surrounded by guys who aren't really playmakers, your Corey Brewer type of guys that kind of can't get their own, and that puts him in the position to have to be the one that creates and reads and determines where the shot's going to come from. I think that's when he's at his worst. But I think with a guy like Randle, a guy with Kuzma, like Kuzma on the second unit, guys that can kind of get their own buckets, the ball's going to find Clarkson in spots where it's obvious what the decision is. And if you can take the decision out of Clarkson's hands, I think he's effective. And so that's what I anticipate from him over the course of this season, is that if he because last year the one guy that he played with in that second unit who could get his own was Lou Williams, and Lou is really good at getting Lou's own, but not necessarily creating shots for everybody. I think having a guy like Randle on the court, being a really good half-court playmaker, I think we're going to see that out of Bogut as well, and I'm curious to see how Luke plays those two, because offensively, as counterintuitive as it seems, in the half court, Randle and Bogut have played similar roles in similar offenses, being that big up top that reads guys coming off of screens. So I'm curious if Luke's going to play those two together. So that's something that I think that Randle having the ball and then just hitting JC, and JC just knows, hey, I go up with it here, he's going to benefit from that a lot.
Randall's had a couple of really nice assists to Clarkson, like on lobs and like little like good smart reads.
Clarkson's done well to come up from the corner and then slip the screen. That's something that the Lakers don't do enough of. It's something that Luke mentioned in practice today that Bogut got a dunk off of. And I loved hearing this. This has been a complaint I've had for like 3 years, is that the bigs don't slip enough screens. And so Bogut, went to set the screen and slipped it and got a dunk out of that. Clarkson's been doing a good job of making that read, and he's been right on the same page with Randle in that respect. So I do think that's going to be a good pairing between the two. Let's move on to a couple of, I think, positional battles. Zubac and Bogut. Let's start with you, Tim. What are kind of your thoughts on who should be getting the minutes, on kind of what we don't have any data on Bogut for this preseason, and it's probably folly to go too deep into preseason data as it is, but kind of who do you see winning out amongst the two of those?
It's an interesting question just because we don't quite know what Bogut is, and I would assume that there's a reason he wasn't on an NBA team all throughout free agency up until a couple weeks ago, and we were able to get him for so cheap. So that has me hesitant and not quite sure if I need to, how much of these reports from guys like Laker Film Room at these practices talking up how great he's been in practice. But at the same time, if he can be what we've seen him be in Golden State and even last year in Dallas, he was still a pretty good player. That would be if he can be that player, that's probably better than what Zoo was able to bring last year. I took a long look, and I wrote a piece on the website going over his offense and the value he brings and the passing. Is it good? Is it bad? And he was a guy that had a ton of assists and potential assists and secondary assists and was able to distribute really, really well, but also had a ton of passing turnovers. And overall, it once you account for both of those things, he ended up grading out all right as a passing big man. But I think one big benefit of that is because he's trying to make those passes, that's going to lead to more cutting from his teammates and more movement and maybe some more screens. And if you know that when he has the ball and you get open, you're going to get the ball, I think that'll make his teammates more willing to move around and cut and do all those good things that effect isn't quite there with Zubac, at least not at this point from what I've noticed. So I think that's one potential factor that could be, if it's a 50-50, you may want to lean that way because it might just lead to better offense for the team overall when he's on the court.
Yeah, look, I think that Bogut's value defensively, he didn't play much in Dallas, and when he did, he didn't look like the same guy, which is sort of weird for Dallas because, Rick Carlisle's an interesting coach that way in that sometimes he gets certain guys to be very productive and then sometimes guys just don't work out for him. Out of all the really good coaches, Carlisle is one of the guys where that seems to happen to a lot. Then he went to Cleveland and he broke his leg. And so are the Lakers going to get the Andrew Bogut who played really well for Golden State but then maybe sort of got schemed out of the playoffs late? Because that guy can be really useful to this specific Lakers team as a passer, as an interior defender, and not just an interior defender like his own, like just a backline communicator and someone who can actually really help a team on that end of the floor. If he's going to be that guy, look, I like Zubac as much as the next guy. And I think that after having a really rough summer, he had, a decent enough preseason. It's just that I don't think the Lakers brought Andrew Bogut in for a coach who, used to coach him for him to like not play at all. I think that Bogut's gonna end up getting some minutes, and honestly, I think he's probably gonna show that he should be, the fourth big man, the third center basically, if you're gonna count Julius Randle as a center.
I think Bogut's going to be in the rotation. Now, the degree to which he's effective, I'm not sure. I think, it's natural for all of us to kind of gravitate and be fond of those who are like us. And the thing about Bogut that I think Luke likes is he knows how basketball works, which seems like a very general statement that you'd figure every NBA player knows how. But on a team with so many young guys, you have a lot of talent. And this is why young teams aren't good, right? Is they don't really know how basketball works in a number of different situations. They don't know how to exploit different situations. Whereas a guy like Bogut has seen any possible thing that you could throw at him on the basketball court hundreds of times. He's, not a great athlete at this stage of his career, but he's a great passer who understands the game. Very similar to what Luke Walton was as a player. I think this team probably can use more guys who know how to play, and that will help coalesce the more talented guys who are less experienced. I have no question that he's going to beat Zubac out in that respect. I think Zubac still has a good future in the NBA, but exactly what you said, Darius. I think that Bogut's going to win out, and I actually think Randle's going to be more of the third center than Bogut will be. I think Bogut's going to get a good 15 to 18 minutes per game once he's healthy and ready to go and his conditioning is up. So he's a good rim protector. He does have value, and you kind of know what you're going to get from him, but I think that Luke really likes him, and at the end of the day, we can talk for hours and hours about stuff, but if Luke likes a guy, that guy's going to play. So
when the head coach likes you.
Yeah, it's certain things matter a little more than others,
yes.
Right? So
yes.
So
yes.
Let's
right.
move on, I think, to the last positional battle, and then we'll kind of talk about the end of the bench guys. But backup point guard spot is going to be an important one to a team that has, Lonzo has been banged up since from his college days to summer league to now the preseason. We haven't gotten a lot of consecutive games in a row from Lonzo, and that's concerning. And the two guys battling it out are, maybe not the caliber of guys that you'd want to be battling it out for a backup point guard spot, but that's where this team is right now, and that's, of course, Tyler Ennis and Caruso. I had a really amazing interview with Caruso a couple days ago. He was so good that, and we just talked, made a video out of it. You can find it, Form Blue and Gold. But we just talked about how he runs the point guard spot and how the Lakers offense works. And he's obviously a really thoughtful guy that he's coach's son and all that. Darius, I know you're an advocate of Caruso, as am I. Tim, I'm curious, where do you stand on kind of the Ennis versus Caruso thing?
I'm much more on the Caruso side, and I think it's interesting looking at those two guys specifically because they're on different ends of the spectrum in a couple different ways. Ennis is a guy who he's a really good scorer off of the pick and roll. He's a great jump shooter. He was in the 90th percentile as a jump shooter last year, his Houston and LA data combined. He's great off the dribble and catching and shooting, but he's just such a bad passer and was one of the few guys that really stood out when I was watching film. Because I was watching film looking at scheme stuff, and it stood out, and I had to pause and rewind and watch again just because he was making just really boneheaded decisions and missing reads and missing back cuts. There would be flare screens that he just didn't seem to notice at all, and that was really frustrating for me. And it wasn't stuff that watching live I noticed, and most people wouldn't notice just because it's not being passed to, so I'm not seeing those flare screens getting set at the time. But going back on film, at least the first 3 games, there was a lot of that going on, and the execution wasn't quite there and the passing wasn't quite there, but I was pleased by the just off-ball motion existing and hoping that it would continue to develop. But that was something that kind of ended up going away the last couple games, and I think part of that is it just wasn't rewarded. You'd set the screen and you just wouldn't get the ball, so I think the effort there kind of dissipated. And if we look on the other end of things, Caruso is a guy that stood out on film as someone who was finding those players, and then also his off-ball IQ, I think, really, really stood out to me, more so than any other player on the team, just as the awareness to set screens for others and try to get them to use his flare screens, and then also trying to tell them where to go and where to set a screen and if they should cut or not. And so in that sense, him being on the court with the ball in his hands or without the ball in his hands, he's helping make other guys better and getting them in the right positions to succeed. He's always been a good passer out of the pick and roll. One of his big areas of deficiency is his off-the-dribble shooting. He's a great spot-up shooter, just catching and shooting. He was in the 89th percentile full year in the D League in like 60 games or whatever it was. That's continued throughout Summer League and preseason, but he's such a poor off-the-dribble shooter, and that really inhibits what he's able to do from the pick and roll as a scorer. So that's where the one big limitation is for him. But I think he's just twice the passer Ennis is, and I think he helps make other guys better. And if we're just looking at trying to have that second unit be able to emulate the first unit, or if Lonzo goes down, fill a guy into that spot, I think Caruso is a much better fit into that kind of role. And if we're going just from starters to bench, he can play a similar type of point guard position. And if Lonzo goes down, you don't need to tell Caruso to be Lonzo. He can be himself, and that's a relatively close fit to what Lonzo's able to bring on the court as far as the types of scoring and the types of the passing that he brings. Whereas Ennis just isn't that, and is frustrating because I think he holds the team down because of that passing, and things were just standing out to me on film that the Lakers could have had a great alley-oop dunk or could have had a great bounce pass to a cutter or these different flare screens, and could have us talking about the off-ball movement that LA's doing, but because he's not passing it to them, we just don't see it at all, and we think nothing's changed from a scheme perspective.
That's great stuff, man. He's not somebody that I've particularly paid attention to, so that's really, really good stuff. Darius, what are your thoughts on the whole Caruso Ennis thing?
I think the point that Tim makes about sort of replicating style from unit to unit is probably one of my bigger points of emphasis and arguments that I would make in favor of Caruso. He's sort of Lonzo light in that regard. He is much more of a pure point guard, but I like a lot of, Tim mentioned a ton of like intangibles and things like that, and those are things that I sort of eat up as like a fan. Some of my favorite players were guys who just brought like intangibles to the floor, and Caruso does so many little things well and right, and he's just a smart player. To me, it's no coincidence that the Lakers just looked like a more organized and better team when Caruso was the one playing point guard for them. And on some levels, it's like a little unfair to Ennis in that when Lonzo was playing and Ennis was his backup, Ennis looked fine. When Ennis became the starter because Lonzo was out, Ennis looked worse. And Caruso's only been a backup. You know, he was always facing, backups pretty much all of the time, unless it was like late game situations. But he just competes well, he competes smart, and he brings a lot of things to the table Ennis cannot bring. And the things that Ennis does bring to the table, I feel like Caruso can do those well enough. Maybe not the shooting off of the dribble, because his form really is like straight in front of his face, and he brings up like his shooting pocket, he brings it right through where the defender would be. So I can understand why his shooting off of the dribble isn't strong. But in every other facet, the spot-up shooting, if he were to come off screens or off of the pick and roll against bigs who like drop low, he can hit that mid-range jumper, and it's not a problem. So if it was a choice, I'd pick Caruso. It doesn't seem like it's a choice, though, because he's on a two-way contract, and the other guy is going to make the team.
I mean, maybe I misunderstand the two-way contracts, too. I think that like it would just convert to a guaranteed deal if he was for more than 45 days, right? So he could theoretically...
They would have to convert it,
right,
basically, or he couldn't come back
right,
up.
Right.
So we would need to cut someone at that point.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Huh.
They need to cut Ennis.
Right. Yeah, no, I think...
If that were the case, though, if he's going to be playing 50 games or whatever it is, at that point you probably are cutting Ennis.
Well, I said this in an article though, where I sort of discussed the position battle, not at length, but enough. But Lonzo's been banged up enough where you need 3 point guards on this roster, including Lonzo. You just do. And if you're not going to trust Clarkson to be the third point guard, or some combination of Clarkson and Ingram, then there actually needs to be a guy whose position says point guard next to his name. And right now, that's why it's good that Caruso is on a two-way contract, because if you need him for a stretch of games, you can play him for a stretch of games. I honestly think, though, that you did not know who was on the two-way contract and who had the guaranteed contract, or if those things were not a consideration, I honestly think Caruso would be the backup, even from the coach's perspective.
Yeah, I think, my understanding is that he has definitely gotten their attention. I think Ennis is going to be given a shot to show what he can do the early part of the season. I don't think that it's a permanent situation. I think that's where, things will begin the year. But Caruso, I think he can get some valuable run in the D-League where he can really focus on, can I score out of those pick and roll situations, and work on that off the dribble jumper. But in terms of his contributions, like with Ennis, if he's not, scoring or passing, and it's very interesting to hear Tim, levy the criticisms about his passing. It's not something that I've noticed, but I definitely, believe him on that. He doesn't contribute in many ways. Caruso's a guy, he's a better athlete than Ennis. He'll get you some rebounds. He has he crashes the offensive glass in ways that I think we've gotten a couple of offensive boards on it. I think he's going to get a tip dunk or two, the way he will loop around from the wing and attack in a way that they were either made shots or it didn't bounce his way. But he had a couple of tip dunk opportunities in the preseason that had me cracking up when I was watching it on tape. Like, that dude's going to get, mark my words, he's going to get a tip dunk or two this year, whether it's with the defenders or with the Lakers. So yeah, he's a better athlete than Ennis. He contributes on the boards. Tim mentioned, and he's absolutely right, really good screen setter. Really makes contact on those screens and comes off of those screens after setting them. He'll pop back out and into his next action. His outlet passing ability is wonderful. He's a better leaper than he is laterally quick. So he has a little difficulty staying in front of the kind of quick twitch guys, but so does Ennis. It's not like that's something that Ennis is great at. So, I'm firmly behind Caruso for that spot, and I think that he's going to have, a career in the NBA, which is really remarkable for a guy, like him. So, all right, let's do a little bit of rapid fire throughout the rest of the roster to close it out. Man, it's tough starting with this, but let's just get your guys' quick thoughts on, only the third highest paid player on the team, Luol Deng. Darius, what does this season look like for him?
Well, I think he's going to start the first two games of the season.
You think they'll go with him?
I do. Luke likes veteran guys. Deng's smart. He's like mistake averse. I don't think he'll probably get more than 2 shifts during the game, though. I think he'll get his shifts at the start of the first and the third quarters, and that'll be it, and probably play like 15 minutes or something like that. Maybe he gets a third shift at like the start of the fourth quarter, but doesn't close, so maybe he gets 18 minutes or something like that. Look, I thought Deng played okay during the minutes that he actually got during the preseason. Most of those were at power forward or, where he was playing forward next to either Ingram or Kuzma or something like that. So it didn't matter if he was technically the 3 or technically the 4. He was with another like similarly skilled forward. I like Deng. I just don't like him playing on the wing. I wish the Lakers weren't so deep at power forward and that he could actually get minutes there, because I think that he could still be a contributing level player. It's just a shame that they signed him to this giant contract to be a small forward.
Right. Yeah, he's somebody that I think he can still be a rotational quality player in the NBA, which does not, of course, match the contract that he's gotten. But when I say that, like, there are several guys that I want playing ahead of him at his, I don't want him getting much run at the 3. At the 3, I'd rather have Brandon Ingram. I'd rather have Kyle Kuzma. And I'd even rather just see them running 3-guard lineups. Like, let's get Lonzo, KCP, and Clarkson out there, for example. It would be something I'd prefer to seeing Deng at the 3. So he's like, 4th string at that point? And then on, at the 4, you've got Randle and Nance and Kuzma there as well. So he's like no better than fourth string at any position I could put him at, despite him being, not a terrible player at this point. And so, yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I hope he's not playing a ton this year. I don't see, like, if he's going to play, I want him to be at the power forward position, but if he's playing power forward, that means that people have been traded or there are injuries or he's playing over guys that we don't want him playing over. I definitely don't think at this point in his career he's going to be a positive contributor as a small forward. And like you said, I'd rather see Kuzma, Ingram, I'd rather see Clarkson in there, KCP. Like, there are a lot of different guys I'd rather see at the 3 than him. Going back to his Miami days when he did his final year, he played some 3 and he also played a lot of 4. I don't have the data pulled up in front of me, but his individual efficiency and then the team's efficiency was much better with him as a power forward than as a small forward. And I think if we're going to use him, it's got to be in that way, but I just don't see the avenue there for that. I'm hoping he doesn't start these first couple games because it'd be really weird for him to start and then just disappear.
But that's how Luke does it, right? Like, Luke likes to pull guys from the third unit and put them with the starters.
Units together. Yeah.
So
right.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be either him or Brewer. That'd be my guess is who starts on that. So that's a good segue to Corey Brewer. What do you see out of him this year, Darius?
A lot of running fast.
A little bit of cooking.
No, seriously, look, Brewer's a good veteran guy. Like, I mean, he's just not a very useful player at this stage. He still gambles too much in the passing lanes and pressures in ways that he shouldn't. And I'd honestly be interested in him getting minutes with Lonzo just to see if they could, be like Brady to Moss.
Yeah, just like run, and who cares if we don't have a transition opportunity?
Yes, look, man, Brewer loves to get out and run. He loves to challenge shots and then leak out. Like, that's Corey Brewer's game. I'd love to see him rewarded by Lonzo Ball for that. Besides that, I've got little to say about Corey Brewer. Besides, look, he seems like a good enough guy. I'm not going to talk trash about him.
How about you, Tim? You got anything?
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything bad either. I got to take a picture with him at Summer League, and he was a nice guy, so I won't say anything really bad. I don't know. He made 25 shots in transition last year and only 28 in the half court, which I think speaks to how anemic he is on one end and how involved he is in transition just from the ratio there. I can see him running with the starting unit the first couple games and being able to get out in transition and get some of those easy buckets, maybe get a couple putbacks or something like that, and then try to play some okay defense and get by with that. But if we're just looking at what he can do, he's 22nd percentile jump shooting, not good finish, sixth percentile finishing at the rim, first percentile pick and roll scoring. So, like, there's not a lot going on there.
You guys, I mean, basically touched on his best value add could be as the Moss to Lonzo's Brady. The one thing I would add is that he's a guy that I know the young guys respect, and that he very much puts it on himself to be a leader and somebody that he's always talking to the younger guys and trying to. He's that token veteran at the end of the bench that's good for the locker room. That the other day, for example, it was Lonzo's first scrimmage back, and he was ball pressuring Lonzo 94 feet. And that's something that is a place where he can have value, even if it's just in the respect of that's good for Lonzo. It might not be something that we see on the court in the 82 games that we see here, but Corey Brewer ball pressuring you, that is something he can do at this point. And, that's good experience for Lonzo in practice. And he's somebody who he takes a lot of pride in the defensive end. Even when he talks, he talks about wanting the Lakers defense to improve, and that's something that's important to him. So I think he serves as somewhat as a assistant coach on the floor type of guy. So I think that's going to be his main contribution this year. So, all right, let's move on to Josh Hart, the much maligned by Cranjis McBasketball, Josh Hart. So how about you tell us the error of your ways and how great Hart was in like the 1.5 games that he played this preseason?
Yeah, He has a tiny sample, but when he did play, he played pretty good defense. He was, of all the Lakers' opponents, shot the worst against Josh Hart. They shot 27.3%, 6 for 22. So that's good. I didn't get to watch any film because, to be completely honest, I pretty much skipped 95% of the defensive film and solely focused on offense. So I can't tell you if his crazy closeouts are still there or not.
That was actually something that I looked out for specifically for you. So yeah, that was something that he was.
You didn't tell me about it, so I wasn't sure if you were. When we were at Summer League, you let me know.
Well, you know me, man. I bust your balls about stuff, but it was actually something in like your criticisms were always valid in that respect. It was something that he was a lot better at in the preseason than I did see that. Those crazy closeouts as well when he was in college.
Yeah, and that's good because it was one of the bigger things that he had an issue with in college, but it's so correctable. And if he can fix that, then he's in pretty good shape defensively because he does a pretty good job with a lot of the other things he does. I really don't have much on him offensively either, just because he didn't play a lot. Seemed to take a lot of kind of elbow-ish range, catch and shoot jumpers or couple dribbles and kind of turning and fading away, which seems to be his favorite shot in the world. But other than that, I don't really have much on him.
Look, I like Josh Hart. I like, his competitive nature. I think that he's probably going to be a guy who has like an 8 or 10 year career, like in the league, like I just do. I wish he wasn't getting injured every single time we were transitioning to a new part of the season.
Yeah, he's somebody that, I mean, that's it, right? It's hard to have too much of an opinion because of how little he played in Summer League and in preseason. I will say, though, on a team that's maybe a little thin on guards, he's a guy that he has an opportunity there if he can stay healthy. But, yeah, I'm in a similar place where he didn't play enough to really have great takeaways, but he's a smart player that knows where he's supposed to be. He cleaned up some of his defensive issues, but yeah, I have nothing but fairly general things to say about him. So let's move on to who else we got. Damn, this roster is long. Thomas Bryant. Darius, thoughts on him?
I like his energy. I like that he plays hard and runs hard. He's like confident in the things that he does well, and he really seems to like play within his role. I want to see what he does with the South Bay Lakers and see if he can continue kind of what he brought in short spurts to the Summer League team and in the preseason, if he can do that for longer spurts for the South Bay Lakers.
Same things. I'd just love to see him play a little bit more, and I think he's going to need some time to develop, and doing that in the G League will be his best chance to do so. He played well in Summer League. We got to see that energy in person. And he really got the crowd going a couple different times. So it was cool to have him on the team. He seemed to really enjoy it. He was really efficient in Summer League, but really didn't. I think he was like 4 for 8 in preseason. So he didn't play a whole lot. I just want to see him develop, get a little bit better. He can kind of space the floor a little bit, which is a nice thing to see. So if he can maybe get a stint or two up with the parent team later in the season and be able to be a good roll man, be able to kind of space the floor a little bit, pick and pop, get some putbacks, be a somewhat of a rim protector and bring some energy, I think I'd be happy with that season from him.
He was a guy that Luke has been very complimentary of. He loves his screen setting, and he made a comment the other day about how he came in cold, it sat for 3.5 quarters. It came in and on the first play just cracked a guy. And that was something that, stood out to Luke. He's, as you guys alluded to, he's caught in a numbers game and he's not going to play much with the parent club, at least at the beginning of the season. Maybe there's a trade or something like that frees up some third big man type of minutes. But he's an interesting prospect. One thing that stood out to me on tape that you wouldn't expect, he's a really good passer for his position. He made some nice reads to Kuzma and good passer out of the post, and that's something that you can never have too many of those guys, especially in front court positions. So he's somebody I've been very impressed by, and I know that Luke has been. He referred to him the other day as a tough SOB, and you want your coach saying that about you. So very excited to see what he can do over the course of the year, mostly with the South Bay Lakers. All right, I think we're down to the last guy, and that is Luke himself. I think he's coming into a year where I think the "you're not Byron, thank God" honeymoon is about over. And I think that we're going to start settling into opinions on what Luke can do well and what he doesn't do well. Darius, what do you want to see from the coaching perspective out of him this season?
I want to see the timing in which he tries to advance things. Luke has been very process-oriented in his first, year plus at this point, and he's talked a lot about wanting to make sure that his guys get it. I want to make sure that we got this down before we move on. And I can respect that as someone who is very process-oriented myself. That said, at some point he's going to need to advance the game plan, or what are we really doing here? Kind of thing. And so I'm trying to figure out what type of approach he takes with a young team. I'm not sure about his X's and O's acumen, but he was such a smart player and he had such good feel for the game that I actually think that there's stuff there that he can probably do, but maybe he doesn't feel comfortable yet with this group. What do you guys see?
I've seen improvement, and I went through each of the games specifically looking at and diagramming every play that I saw. And from last year to this year, I have seen improvement. And again, kind of how I was talking about earlier with some of those off-ball screens that weren't executed well, or like Ennis didn't see. So as someone watching live, you just didn't see it. That was a lot of what I was perceiving with the scheme. We were running some good plays, and there were plays, like a couple stick out in my mind that I was not expecting from Luke, where we've got like a Chicago action where Lonzo's setting a pin down screen for KCP after passing to, in a delay series, he passes the ball over to Randle and then goes and sets that pin down and then immediately slips that and runs into a staggered off-ball screen as KCP's attacking downhill off of a dribble handoff, and just different things that have more than one action going on, things with weak side action, and a lot of it just wasn't executed well, so it wasn't stuff that was being noticed. But there are signs there that I just didn't see before in Summer League or last season that have me feeling a little bit better about his X's and O's acumen. And a lot of it's similar stuff, and we've run a lot of these delay series last year, but they got rid of a lot of the crap that they were running before. They've replaced it with some other different sets that are looking pretty good. And I'm feeling much more confident with Luke this year and long term as far as what he's able to do as a coach, because that one area where he came in and he's able to kind of be a leader of men, and this is something you guys have talked about before, he's strong in those areas, and those are areas that are harder to develop, whereas the X's and O's stuff, you can start from scratch or start just as he played in the league but hasn't really ever had to think about this stuff. And you can teach somebody those things, and he can grow in those areas. And I think he is growing in those areas. And just from that perspective, looking long term, my outlook of him has been able to change, and that trajectory in my mind has changed somewhat drastically over a short period of time because he's shown that growth. And I think the Lakers will have a good coach. I don't think he's a top coach or an above average coach right now, but I think we're in a good spot moving forward.
That's the nicest I've ever heard you talk about him. That's really interesting to hear. For me, from the sets, what I've noticed is that they're running fewer actions, but they're more sophisticated within the actions that they're running. So last year when I charted the offense, in terms of half-court sets, it was they were probably running about 30 different actions. I would say that's probably less than half of that through the preseason. I've said ad nauseum, I've talked about delay series, but that's something that they've run most prominently. And I asked him about that the other day, and that was something that he alluded to as well. That he feels like he said that they have gotten better at making the reads, but they still have to make the play calls for the players. So ideally, where he wants to get to is to be able to where they don't have to make any play calls, and it's just they're able to make the reads based on the way the defense is playing them, a true read and react type of style. But for the time being, the coaches are recognizing where the defenses are exploitable and then making play calls based on that. But the ability to have guys that can go out there and do that in real time and be like, oh, well, we are supposed to run this action, but this weak side defender is here, so I'm going to go here instead because that's how we can beat it. That's just a matter of repetition. And I think it's wise of them to give them better, as you were alluding to, Tim, the better weak side action and more like sophistication within just a small handful of sets rather than what they did last year, which was being well below average on a lot of things. I think they'll be more effective, especially with the type of squad that they have that wants to run. They'll be able to do those things faster because they have fewer things to learn. My big questions about him from a technical standpoint are on the defensive end, as I talked to in a recent podcast. The defending the three-point line, the what do you say, Darius, earlier? Chronic overhelpers.
Habitual.
That's something. Habitual
yeah,
overhelpers.
yes.
That's better. There wasn't enough for the rest of the preseason for me to be like, aha, they've got it. That's something that needs to be fixed, or they're going to get really badly exploited. You had the Houston Golden State game tonight where it's a track meet, and there are a lot of those teams out there these days, even the 8th seed level type teams. And if we can't defend the three-point line, you can't be even a below average defensive team. You're going to be really bad. Then from the leader of men standpoint, I still think that, but the Randle stuff really rubs me the wrong way. And there's been some, I don't know, I feel like there's like favoritism. I want to see, like, you will lose that leader of men feeling from your players as soon as you stop having it as a meritocracy. And I think that's how Randle's feeling right now, to be honest with you. I'm curious about why like Randle and Lopez haven't been tried yet. I don't like how he dips into his third unit rather than keeping his second unit together, because I think that what happened last year was they had a good starting unit, a really good bench unit, and then anytime they were blended, it was absolutely god-awful. I think that you need to be able to bring the next best guy up, because if you're going from like your starter to Marcelo Huertas level player, or if you're going to like, oh, we're going to start KCP, but he's suspended the first two games, let's start Luol Deng at the 2 or Brandon Ingram at the 2 and Deng at the 3. Like, you start just dropping off in talent level to a degree that's way more harmful than the benefit that you get from keeping your second unit together. So just things like that. But I do like that, as you said, Darius, they've been very process-oriented, but it's time to start making tangible improvements. So I guess with that, gentlemen, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have two really quick things, two stats on with regard to overhelping. The Lakers were number 1 in preseason in their defense of pick-and-roll ball handler scoring, which is fantastic, and that's a really good sign. And 0.505 points per possession is an elite number, but I think when you look at the rest of the offense generated from the pick and roll, that's not from that players shooting themselves. When we're looking at the kickouts to roll men, rolling or popping or slipping, and we're looking at the cuts and the spot ups, the Lakers were 29th in the defensive roll men, and they were towards the end of the bottom of the league in the rankings defending those spot ups, from kickouts to spot ups and those passes to cuts. So we're definitely overhelping and overcommitting to stopping that one guy and leaving those other players open. And in another way to kind of look at the same thing, we're third in defending pull-up shots, but we were 32nd of the 36 teams, because there were a couple international clubs, in defending catch and shoot opportunities. So we're collapsing and we're stopping that player when they have the ball, but then we're just leaving guys open. And that's something that we're going to need to be able to diagnose better and stop overhelping. And if somebody has their man, don't leave your man to go fix a problem that's not there.
And I suppose we end on the harmonious marriage between the eye tests and the stats